And one day I couldn't pay rent. And I was really annoyed at Jesus. I was like, Jesus, you're not going to pay rent. I might as well get in my car and just live in my car. At least that's paid off. And out of my mouth, without even prompting it, came this thought and word about me traveling the country and being a light to people as I travel with Jesus.
Hey, I'm Dr. Patty Sadallah, and I am welcoming my dear friend Kris Castro today to the discussion. She has an incredible, miraculous true life story of living out Psalm 37:23, where the word says, "The steps of a good and righteous man are directed and established by the Lord, and he delights in his way and blesses his path." The Lord gave Kris a story that will inspire you, that God is a God that directs your path. So Kris, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what God did in your life.
Well, I'm excited about being here, Patty. And this story is really a full cycle moment for you and I, because we started 10 years ago. We got to know each other and then lost touch. And in the process of this story, we reconnected. And it's been amazing ever since to journey with you. So to start out, hearing God's voice, of course, is really one of the things that you do. And I was on a journey of learning to hear God's voice. And through a really difficult situation, that became crucial for me to walk through it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point during this story, I was struggling financially. And one day I couldn't pay rent. And I was really annoyed at Jesus. I was like, Jesus, you're not going to pay rent. I might as well get in my car and just live in my car. At least that's paid off. I had my little pity moment and a little argument with Jesus and basically went on with my day. And then I was at a meeting with a bunch of business leaders who are prophetic. And I was sharing a little bit about my conversation with Jesus and my frustrations. And they were all lovingly laughing with me because we've all been there. And out of my mouth, without even prompting it, came this thought and word about me traveling the country and being a light to people as I travel with Jesus. And I didn't know where it came from, because for me to pack up and leave was just ridiculous. But that word would not leave me. And for the next several days, I felt a deep truth, but it didn't make any sense. And the more I started to press into it and ask Jesus what was going on, the more he sent confirmations about me packing up everything I owned, putting it in a storage unit, and just leaving and getting in my car. But he wouldn't tell me where. He just was like, go. I was like, go where?
And wasn't there a prophetic message spoken over you even before that?
Well, there was, but like most things prophetic, when you hear something and you have no frame of reference for it, you toss it on the shelf until you figure it out or until God pulls it back. And several weeks before, months before, I did get a prophetic word about me walking and taking steps that I couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some other parts of the prophetic word, but I had no context for it.
If I remember correctly, the step, there was no step, and then it appeared right before you took a next step.
That may have been it. I don't recall the exact word, but it was something like that. And I had no context for it. So I threw it on the proverbial shelf and I said, well, Jesus, if that means something, you let me know. And it wasn't until after the trip or during the trip that you made clarity around that.
Mm.
And so it was really neat to go back and to see how that was a prophetic word about the trip that I didn't understand until you brought some clarity to it.
I remember just hearing that prophetic message and seeing what that literally looked like based on how literally the place you had to go would show up 24 hours before you needed to get there. So tell that story. How did that happen?
Well, the trip was basically designed by Jesus that I didn't know anything until I was supposed to know it. And the
Yeah.
entire trip was a leap of faith. So when I left Georgia, I went north because part of me was, a little nervous. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is way outside my comfort zone. But I'm going to go at least in the direction of people that I know, love, and trust, because if something happens, there'll be people there to help me.
Right.
So I went north because I didn't have another direction. And as I went north and started stopping at places, things just happened. I also, at that point, was attending Celebrate Recovery to deal with a lot of the baggage that I was processing through. And I ended up stopping at several Celebrate Recovery groups to give my testimony because I was on the other side of my healing and recovery. And that became a lot of divine moments as well, where I didn't know where I was going, but there happened to be a Celebrate Recovery in the path of my direction. And I would reach out to them and I would say, hey, do you need a testimony speaker? And they would say yes or no. And they would offer me a place to stay because, again, I was living out of my car. So the entire trip was just divine moments of provision, divine intersections of conversations, and just a lot of miraculous things that happened along the way.
Yeah. And when it was all said and done, you crossed, I don't know how many states, but it was how many miles and one day at a time. And how long did it take for God to circle you all the way back to home?
If you look at the map of the United States, I basically traveled the frame of the United States. I went from Georgia all the way up the East Coast, skirted around and saw people that I knew along the way. And I went to Rochester and Buffalo and then continued down, I think, to see friends of mine in Indiana. Then I circled up to see you. That's right. It was Cleveland. And then it was all the way over to outside Seattle, Washington, and then down to California, and then across the bottom of the United States, all the way to Florida, and then back up to Georgia. But it took me 14,000 miles in over 3 months to do that entire journey because I was going at the pace of Jesus. I was not moving until he showed me directionally which way to go, or he confirmed the location for me to stop at.
Yeah. So sometimes you would stay for one night, sometimes a couple nights, and you wouldn't know until the day or the night before where you were going next. And the part that I love about your story with us, Kris and I were on an online community long before it was a thing. This was a lot of years ago. And we never had met in person. We just were in this group together and then stayed sort of Facebook connections. And she called me up out of the blue and said, can I stay with you at your house for a couple days? I am not part of Celebrate Recovery, but tell the story about how cool it was that we got to meet the Celebrate Recovery guy anyway, because he was somebody I knew in college. And
Yeah. And that's
God, right?
funny. That's funny, that divine connection. I mean, we just had a great conversation.
Yeah, you visited our Spirit Life Circle, and one of my Spirit Life Circle members at the time was a Celebrate Recovery person, and she knew the leader, and she mentioned his name, and I was like, I went to college with him. It's a friend of mine. So for the most part, it was Celebrate Recovery networks that gave you the places to rest your head. And I remember when you were with us, your car, my gosh. I mean, I don't even know how many miles you had when you started, but my husband was like, I just don't know how this car's gonna make it. And I remember him doing a little something. He did something, change your oil.
He did an oil change for me.
Yeah, he did an oil change to try to oh my gosh, I hope this makes it. And you did have trouble. Was it Washington? Your car, you had to stay longer to get your car repaired, but there was reasons for that, divine encounters and
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when I left Georgia, I had the car. This was the first car I purchased new in my life. So I bought it in 2000.
Uh-huh.
So at that time, it was 17 years old. And when I left, I had over 220,000 miles, I think, on the car. So it was a very high mileage old car. And
Then
you
you put
know,
14,000 miles back on.
and
The
you just
dream house.
go because Jesus said to go, like, right? I was not going to worry about the car. And it worked for the most part fine. I really didn't have any trouble with it. But when I left and headed west towards Washington State, somewhere along that 1,000-mile route, my cruise control went out, which again for me, it was annoying because if you're on a long trip, you don't want to have to keep going up and down with the gas. But I thought, all right, that's not a big deal. But when I stopped at a rest stop, I noticed my lights wouldn't go off. Even though the car was off, the light switch was off, the lights would stay on. And then I was concerned about the battery. And so I ended up driving 12 hours straight through to get to Washington. And I told my friend who I was meeting that I think the car's going to die once I park it. And so we're going to have to find a mechanic. And it ended up being an interesting experience trying to find a mechanic in this little port town on the coast of Washington State. But there were a lot of divine conversations, and there was a reason I was supposed to stay that long. And overall, it was a great experience because I had never met that friend either. And I had co-written a book with her and known her for years, but we had never been in the same room. So again, it was just really God all over it.
So one question I have for you is, what is the biggest thing you learned about God on this trip?
He is who he says he is. I think depending on when you accept Jesus as your savior, whether it's when you're young or when you're older, you have a finite view of what that means. And you grow in maturity and understanding as you experience God. And up until this point, I had been a Christian since I was a young child. So I had 40 years of Christian experience, and I thought I knew who God was. But this entire journey forced me to trust him at a new depth that I had never had to trust him at. And it forced me to recognize the character of God that is all over the Bible. And through the experience, I really learned that God is provider, that God is love, that God is a miracle worker. Whatever the titles of your books are and all of those, it's every single chapter in all 4 of your books. Yeah. In some way, shape, or form, I learned all of that at a new level.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So what did you learn about yourself?
I learned that when I let go and trust and surrender and don't have any expectations except that Jesus is going to do right by me at some point, that I can have the wildest experiences.
Wow.
And all of that journey forced me, and I say that in a good way, because I said yes, because I learned what I was supposed to learn, because I risked what I needed to risk, because I had faith where I needed to have faith. All of those things brought me the blessing of supernatural peace and joy, which has carried forth in every area of my life. And so now, a couple of years later, I still find that because of that experience, I don't have as many anxious moments as I used to previously. Even when things are really hard and I am really not happy with anything that's going on, there is a peace that's present that carries me through. And overall, I think there's just a strength that I refrained from saying yes to the risk of that
Wow.
adventure. And so I'd
Mm,
really encourage everybody, if Jesus is telling you to do something, do it.
yeah, that's so good because, yeah, he is who he says he is, and he will take care of you and just the blessings of you taking those risks. And it's just been great because in that encounter where you said, "Hey, can I stay with you?" You and I have stayed very close ever since, which is
That's,
really
yeah,
cool. It's like get to know each other and really pray and bless and support each other and things that are going on in our lives. And yeah, God is who he says he is. And yeah, thank you so much. But listen, before you go, you wrote a book about this. So share with us about that book and how people can find it. And what are you doing now with your
absolutely. Well, I'm just going to change my background so that you can see it. So
sure.
this is the book. It's called Crazy Might Be a Blessing in Disguise. And that's the map of everywhere that I went. You can get it on Amazon. It'll also give you the direct link,
Mhm.
but it's an opportunity for you to take the next adventure that you have with Jesus. And I would encourage you to do it. And if you want me to come speak to your group, I'm happy to do that too.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Kris. It's been a blessing and God bless you guys. Hope to see you on the next one.